Two little boys and the old family dog on the banks of a stream stood one day. The boys had decided old Rover to drown, a nuisance put out of the way. The old bully fellow stood close by their side, no sign of old age or decay, with a wag of his tail and a tear in his eyes. The tear in his
This is a story about the rise and fall of a once thriving town in a high mountain valley of western Wyoming. It is also the story about a unique farming community that has struggled to push back the tide of development. And like other small agricultural communities across the United States, fathers whose grandfathers homesteaded and worked the land have watched as their sons and daughters have moved out in search of better work. Descendants of the first settlers in Freedom still operate small farms here, but what remains of Freedom's center now can only be described as a ghost town.
Well, they came because Brigham Young told them to come to settle this area.
Freedom, Wyoming was first settled in the late 1870s by a handful of Mormon families. They came from Idaho and they came from Utah, among other places. They came to the Salt River Valley to colonize what Brigham Young had declared was the star of all valleys.
The Luthi family originated from Switzerland, and they actually came to the United States in pursuit of their religious freedom. They joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or what everyone calls as Mormons.
But Freedom was the first settlement to really take off. And if the rumors are to be believed, it was a little bit different than the other towns. The polygamous settlers named the first settlement Freedom because of the town's location on the state line between Idaho and Wyoming.
I'm standing in the middle of the state line between Wyoming and Idaho. This side is Idaho, and this side is Wyoming. And the line divides the town by 2 states and 3 counties. Some of the people that were Mormons were polygamous, and the town of Freedom got its name by having the law enforcement from Wyoming coming to Freedom, and the polygamists going to the Idaho side where the law officials could not touch them. And then when the Idaho officials came, they went to the Wyoming side, and the Idaho officials could not touch them.
Well, my one grandfather had a family in Afton, and he had a family in Freedom.
I have always been on the Wyoming side. I have been raised and grown up on the Wyoming side. Freedom is unique in the fact that the post office is in Wyoming, so Idaho people have an address of Freedom, Wyoming. They have an Idaho driver's license. They go to Idaho Falls to cash a check. They have an Idaho driver's license. They have a Freedom, Wyoming address.
Idaho and Wyoming each have their own crews that work the roads, and they didn't always coordinate with each other. And I do remember one summer that one half of the road was paved and the other half wasn't for quite a period of time. In fact, it was most of that summer. As my dad always used to say, if he wanted to impress people, he'd tell them that he owned land in 2 states and 3 counties.
But these days, when people think of Freedom, Wyoming, they most often think of Freedom Arms, a small firearms factory here that makes custom-made handguns. Wayne Baker started the business in 1979.
Well, I'm Wayne Baker, and I started the gun company here in Freedom. I bought a piece of property here on this side rather than over on the Idaho side. I didn't like the politics of Idaho.
Wayne Baker's grandmother, Anna Eliza Baker, built one of the first log cabins in the valley in 1889.
Well, the original house, as near as we can determine, was built about a half a mile this side of where Freedom Arms is today, and on the east side of the canal that runs right there in front of Freedom Arms.
By the early 1900s, Freedom was a major commercial center in the valley. Creameries became big business, including Ernest Brogue's Star Valley Swiss Cheese Company. Lower Valley Power and Light opened its first office in downtown Freedom. The company today is Lower Valley Energy and supplies energy to northern Wyoming and parts of Idaho.
At one time, downtown Freedom was one of the largest towns in Star Valley. You'll notice the building up here was the Star Valley Bank. Post office at one time, this building behind me was a blacksmith shop. And the next building was Brogan Hemmert Hardware. And then there was a service station on the corner. The garage across the street was a billiard or a pool hall and a barber shop. And at one time we had 2 grocery stores in the town.
You may not be able to tell it by looking at it right now, but the building we're standing by was actually a roller skating rink as well as a dance hall. And I remember coming here to roller skate. I also remember some Halloween parties. Great time, you know, that's what you remember when you're growing up.
Yeah, in those years, all the different towns had their own plays. And we'd go from town to town, you know, and put them on. So we, of course, always had some of those. And then we had some traveling artists that called the Glendoras. They were fascinating to us because they were dressed in beautiful costume dresses and painted, you know, and they were good. I always got a bang out of it. There was 2 men that would come to town, and they was always in such a hurry they never closed their doors, car doors, you know. They'd just jump out, run, and leave the cars running, run into the hardware and get what they needed and run back and get in their cars. I got a kick out of that.
Like any small community, Freedom has had its fair share of quirky rumors and old wives' tales.
There was a story that got started that the hippies were going to come to all places called Freedom. And I remember that there was concern about that they would come and stay in the old, what I remember to be the old Nelson store. And at that time it was vacant. And once that rumor got going, there was concern that, you know, that there would actually be a place for people to stay, even though they probably weren't going to be welcome in Freedom. And within a few days, that store came down.
By the time World War II ended, Freedom's status as Star Valley's biggest commercial center had changed. Locals blame the demise of the downtown on several factors. Some say it started when the Freedom schools closed, while others say it happened when the Freedom State Bank merged with Star Valley State Bank and moved to Afton.
And they took away so many of our things, our businesses, and this from Freedom. They took our bank, the power and light building, the school, and they just couldn't pull together, you know.
After the majority of businesses left downtown Freedom, Afton became the commercial hub of Star Valley. Life on the family farm became a struggle as many Freedom farmers found it more difficult to make a living off the land. Parents watched as their children left the valley for better jobs.
Just depending if they get a job, and if they can't, then they had to leave. Or if they married a girl from out of here that changed their thinking.
One of the things I've noticed, the big changes, is that no one's coming back to do agricultural work anymore. And I know it's a hard life, it's not a life that pays particularly well. And that's why you see communities such as Freedom gradually changing from very agricultural to almost, I would say, suburbia, Wyoming suburbia, because more and more people are selling their farms and turning those into subdivisions.
Once our kids get out of school, go away to school, employment is somewhere else. They do not live on the farm. On the farm you can't make a living.
Star Valley saw a surge in growth in the 1990s. Part of the growth came from neighboring Jackson Hole, where high real estate prices sent buyers into Star Valley. Large farm owners sold to developers, creating a subdivision boom to accommodate the growth. It's a fate that many in Freedom hope to avoid.
I hate to see Freedom go by the wayside, but yet at the same time I would rather see it as it is instead of having it subdivided and so on.
Locals here say that as long as large landowners can hold on to what they have in Freedom, it won't likely subdivide as quickly as Star Valley's other towns. But what will happen to downtown Freedom's ghost town appearance remains to be determined. For those that live here, it's a constant reminder of what their town used to be.
Well, it makes them heartache to what it used to be. And the kids, I don't believe my kids will ever really believe what we tell them, you know, that it was actually like that. When you'd have our 4th and 24th of July, go up here to the Ball Diamond, I tell you, this town was full of people.
I think Wyoming is a state of small towns. And I think one of the nice things is everybody can relate to each other if you're from a small town. That's one of the nice things about Wyoming, still being relatively small and growing up in a small town such as Freedom.
Kick him today, tomorrow he'll play games with you. 'Tis true he is old now and quite in a way, but life for him still has its charms. So grant him this favor he asks of you. Let him live and die on the old farm.